The rain came down hard that Monday morning, turning the parking lot of Riverside Medical Center into a maze of puddles and slick pavement. Dr. Margaret Chen sat in her car for a moment, watching the windshield wipers push water back and forth in a steady rhythm. She glanced at herself in the rearview mirror. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Just jeans, an old blue sweater, and her favorite pair of sneakers that had seen better days. She looked nothing like a hospital director. And that was exactly the point. Margaret had spent the entire weekend reading patient reviews online. Comment after comment painted a troubling picture. Long wait times, rude staff, patients feeling ignored or dismissed. Some reviews praised the doctors, sure, but the overall experience? Not good at all. And in just 1 week, she would officially become the person responsible for fixing all of it. But today, she was nobody. Just another face in the crowd. No title, no authority, no white coat announcing her position. She wanted to see the real Riverside Medical Center, the one that existed when the director wasn't watching, because that was the hospital her patients experienced every single day. She grabbed her worn leather bag from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the rain. The cold drops hit her face immediately, and she jogged toward the entrance, dodging puddles along the way. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and she stepped into the warmth of the lobby. The smell hit her first, that distinct hospital smell. A mix of antiseptic cleaner and something else she could never quite name. It was the same in every hospital she'd ever worked in, from her first job as a resident 25 years ago to now. Some things never changed. The lobby was busy. A young mother bounced a crying baby on her hip while trying to fill out forms with her free hand. An elderly man sat alone in a wheelchair near the window, staring out at the rain. 2 teenagers whispered to each other in the corner, both looking worried. A security guard stood by the entrance, nodding politely at people as they came in. Margaret walked past the information desk, where a tired-looking volunteer was trying to help 3 people at once. She made a mental note. They needed more volunteers at the front desk, especially during morning hours. She headed straight for the emergency department. If you wanted to know how a hospital really operated, the ER would tell you everything. It was where the pressure was highest, where patients ran thin, and where the cracks in the system showed up first. The ER waiting room was packed. Every seat was taken and a few people stood against the walls. Some looked genuinely ill, pale and sweating. Others looked frustrated, checking their phones every few seconds, probably wondering how much longer they'd have to wait. Margaret found a spot near the corner where she could watch everything without being too obvious about it. She set her bag down and pulled out a small notebook. To anyone watching, she probably looked like someone waiting for a friend or family member. But she was taking in everything. The way the nurses moved between rooms, the tone of voice the staff used when calling out names, how long it took for someone to acknowledge a patient who approached the desk with a question. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. She watched a nurse at the registration desk, a woman probably in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag said Jessica Martinez. Margaret observed as Jessica checked in patients, answered phone calls, and typed rapidly on her computer. The woman moved fast, efficient, clearly experienced. But there was something else Margaret noticed. Something that made her frown. An elderly woman approached the desk, moving slowly with a walker. She was confused about the forms she'd been given, holding them up with shaky hands. "Excuse me, dear," the old woman said softly. "I don't understand this section here. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, and I—" "Just fill out what you can," Jessica interrupted, barely looking up from her computer screen. "If you can't read it, have someone help you. I need to keep this line moving." The elderly woman's face fell. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be a bother. It's just that I don't have anyone with me today, and, ma'am, there are 10 people behind you. Please step aside and do your best with the forms." Jessica's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cold. The kind of tone that made it clear the conversation was over. The old woman shuffled away, looking embarrassed and small. She sat back down and stared at the forms, her hands trembling slightly. Nobody helped her. Everyone was too busy, too rushed, too focused on their own problems. Margaret felt a knot form in her stomach. This was exactly what the reviews had described. Staff who were technically doing their jobs but missing the whole point of why they were there. Healthcare wasn't just about checking boxes and moving people through a system. It was about people. Real people with fears and pain and confusion. She watched Jessica for another 10 minutes. The pattern continued. Short answers. Impatient sighs. A general attitude that said, "I don't have time for this." And yet Margaret noticed something else too. The woman looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. The way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was watching. The slight slump in her shoulders between patients. This wasn't just about a rude nurse. Something bigger was going on here. Margaret glanced around the waiting room again. The staff looked stretched thin. She counted only 3 nurses visible in the entire ER, trying to manage what looked like at least 30 patients. The doctors were nowhere to be seen, probably buried in examination rooms dealing with the overflow. A phone rang at the nurses' station, and nobody answered it until the 5th ring, because everyone was busy with something else. Understaffed, overworked, and the patients were the ones paying the price. She made more notes in her book. Then she noticed a man in scrubs walking past carrying a tray of medications. He nearly bumped into another nurse coming around the corner, and they did an awkward dance trying to avoid each other in the narrow hallway. Too many people trying to move through spaces designed for fewer. Margaret checked her watch. She'd been there for 40 minutes now, and she'd seen enough to know that her weekend reading wasn't wrong. But she needed more than just observations. She needed to understand the systems, the protocols, the reasons behind what she was seeing. She stood up, brushed off her jeans, and picked up her bag. Time to ask some questions. She walked toward the nurses' station, where Jessica was now typing something into the computer with rapid, aggressive keystrokes. Another nurse rushed past carrying a clipboard, moving so fast she created a breeze. Margaret approached the desk and cleared her throat politely. Jessica didn't look up. "Excuse me," Margaret said, keeping her voice friendly. "I was wondering if I could ask about the average wait times here," and that's when everything changed. Jessica's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. She looked up slowly, her eyes tired and irritated. "I'm sorry, what?" "I was just hoping to ask a few questions about wait times and patient care protocols," Margaret repeated, keeping her tone polite and casual. "I've been observing for a while and—" "Observing?" Jessica's eyebrows shot up. "Ma'am, you can't be behind this desk. This is a staff-only area. You need to wait in the designated seating area like everyone else." Margaret glanced down. She hadn't even realized she'd crossed some invisible line. There was no tape on the floor, no sign marking where visitors were supposed to stop. "I apologize. I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought, it doesn't matter what you thought." Jessica's voice had an edge to it now. She pushed her chair back and stood up, crossing her arms. "Hospital policy is clear. Visitors and family members are not allowed in staff work areas. It's a safety and privacy issue." A few other staff members glanced over. A young doctor with a stethoscope around his neck paused mid-step, watching the interaction. Another nurse pretended to organize charts but kept looking over her shoulder. Margaret raised her hand slightly in a peaceful gesture. "I completely understand. I'll step back. But I was genuinely curious about how the department handles peak hours like this. The waiting room is quite full, and I noticed—" "Are you a patient?" Jessica interrupted. "No, but are you waiting for a patient?" "Not exactly, Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave the ER entirely." Jessica's face was flushed now, a mix of frustration and something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or stress that had been building for weeks and finally found a target. "We have actual emergencies to deal with. Real patients who need real help. I don't have time to answer random questions from people who are just hanging around." The words stung, even though Margaret knew they weren't really about her. This was about a nurse who was drowning, who'd probably been dealing with difficult people all morning, who saw one more person taking up her time when she had none to spare. But still, this wasn't how you talk to people. Any people, patient or not. "I understand you're busy," Margaret said calmly, "but I think there might be a misunderstanding. If I could just explain—" "There's no misunderstanding." Jessica moved around the desk now, positioning herself between Margaret and the nurse's station. "You need to leave now. I'm not asking again." Margaret felt the eyes of everyone in the waiting room on them now. The elderly woman with the walker was watching. The mother with the crying baby had stopped bouncing to look. Even the security guard by the entrance had turned his attention their way. This was escalating fast. Too fast. "Look," Margaret tried again, lowering her voice. I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm just trying to understand how things work here. Maybe we could discuss this somewhere more private. I don't need to discuss anything with you. Jessica's voice was rising now, loud enough that it carried across the waiting room. What I need is for you to follow the rules like everybody else. You've been sitting there for almost an hour just watching people. You haven't checked in. You haven't asked about a patient. You've just been staring and taking notes like some kind of, I don't know what. Margaret felt her heart sink. So Jessica had noticed her, had been watching her watching everyone else. And in Jessica's mind, probably dealing with who knows what kind of morning. A strange woman sitting in the corner and writing things down must have looked suspicious, maybe even threatening. I can explain the notes, Margaret started to say, reaching for her bag. Don't. Jessica held up a hand. I don't want to see whatever you've been writing. For all I know, you're some kind of reporter trying to dig up dirt on us, or a lawyer looking for a lawsuit. We get those, you know. People who come in here pretending to be normal visitors, but really they're just looking for problems. I promise you I'm not a reporter or a lawyer, Margaret said. If you'd just let me show you my security, Jessica called out suddenly, her voice sharp and commanding. We need assistance at the nurses' station. The guard by the entrance immediately started walking over. He was joined by another guard who emerged from a side hallway. Both men looked confused but alert, their hands resting near their radios. Margaret's stomach dropped. This was not how this was supposed to go. Not at all. What's the problem, Jessica? The first guard asked. His name tag read Tom Wilson. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with kind eyes that didn't quite match the serious expression he was trying to maintain. This woman has been loitering in the ER for over an hour, taking notes and watching staff and patients. When I asked her to leave, she refused and tried to get behind the nurses' station. She's disrupting our work and I need her escorted out of the building. Tom looked at Margaret, then back at Jessica. Ma'am, is this true? Have you been asked to leave? I wasn't asked to leave the building, Margaret clarified. I was asked to step back from the desk, which I was attempting to do. But there seems to be some confusion about why I'm here. There's no confusion, Jessica shot back. You don't have a patient here. You're not sick. You have no legitimate reason to be in this ER, and you're taking up space and time that we need for actual medical emergencies. The second security guard, younger and less comfortable with the situation, shifted his weight from foot to foot. Maybe we could all just calm down and— I am calm, Jessica insisted, though her voice suggested otherwise. I'm just doing my job. Part of my job is maintaining a safe and efficient environment for our patients, and right now she's interfering with that. Margaret took a slow breath. She could end this right now. Pull out her ID badge. Show them the appointment letter. Explain that she was the new director doing an informal assessment. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Jessica was looking at her, like she was the enemy. Maybe it was the way the other nurses had gathered at a distance, watching but not intervening. Maybe it was because she knew that if she pulled rank now, she'd never get the truth about what was really happening in this ER, so instead, she said quietly, I'd be happy to leave if that's what you feel is necessary, but I'd like to speak with a supervisor first. Is there someone I could talk to about the situation? Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to complain about me? Fine, go ahead. But you're still leaving this ER first. Tom, please escort her to the administrative office and they can deal with whatever her problem is. Tom looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, if you could just come with me, we'll get this sorted out. Before Margaret could respond, a voice called out from behind them. Jessica, wait a second, everyone turned. An older nurse was walking toward them, her face concerned. She had gray streaks in her hair and the confident walk of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. Her name tag identified her as Patricia Williams. Margaret recognized the look in Patricia's eyes immediately. It was recognition. What is it, Patricia? Jessica asked, some of her confidence wavering slightly. Patricia was clearly senior to her, someone whose opinion mattered. Patricia got closer, her eyes fixed on Margaret. Her mouth opened slightly, and Margaret could see the exact moment everything clicked into place. Jessica, Patricia said slowly, carefully, I think you need to stop and listen for a minute. I have this under control, Jessica insisted. This woman was— I know who this woman is, Patricia interrupted. The waiting room seemed to go completely silent. Even the baby stopped crying. Tom and the other security guard exchanged glances. Jessica's face went from flushed to pale in about 3 seconds. What do you mean you know who she is? Jessica's voice had lost all its authority now, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Patricia looked at Margaret, a question in her eyes. Margaret gave the smallest nod. Permission to continue, Jessica, Patricia said quietly. This is Dr. Margaret Chen. She's the new hospital director. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Jessica's face went through about 5 different expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, horror, more disbelief, and finally a kind of sick understanding that made her sway slightly on her feet. That's not possible, Jessica whispered. She doesn't start until next week. The memo said next week. Margaret finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. The memo was correct. My official start date is next Monday, but I decided to come in early to see how the hospital operates when the new director isn't officially watching. Tom took a step back, looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. The younger guard had gone completely still. The other nurses who'd been watching from a distance suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere in the ER, but Jessica just stood there, frozen, her face now completely white except for 2 bright red spots on her cheeks. Her hands were shaking. And Margaret, standing in her jeans and old sweater with her worn leather bag, looked around at all of them and wondered how deep the problems at Riverside Medical Center really went. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out at first, just a small choking noise that might have been the beginning of a word. Her hands were trembling so badly now that she clasped them together in front of her, knuckles going white from the pressure. Dr. Chen, She finally managed to get words out, but they were barely above a whisper. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I thought. Margaret held up a hand gently. Jessica, take a breath, but Jessica wasn't taking breaths. She was spiraling. The memo said next week. It specifically said Monday the 27th. I didn't know you'd be here early, and you weren't wearing a badge or anything that would identify you. How was I supposed to know? Tom, the security guard, cleared his throat awkwardly. Dr. Chen, I apologize for the confusion. We weren't informed about your visit today. If you'd like, I can escort you to the administrative offices where you'll be more comfortable. That won't be necessary, Tom. Thank you. Margaret's voice was calm, professional. She looked at Jessica, who was now visibly shaking. Jessica, I want you to understand something. This isn't about you failing to recognize me. I dressed this way deliberately. I wanted to see the hospital as patients see it, as regular people experience it. You couldn't have known who I was. Jessica nodded frantically, looking like she might cry. Yes, exactly. I was just following protocol. Visitors aren't allowed in staff areas without proper identification. I was doing what I was trained to do. I was protecting patient privacy and maintaining security. That's partially true, Margaret said, but that's not what concerns me. The words hung in the air. Jessica's face went from hopeful to confused. I don't understand. Margaret glanced around. The waiting room had grown quiet, with at least a dozen patients and family members watching the scene unfold. This wasn't the place for this conversation, but it had already gone too far to stop now. Jessica, before our interaction at the desk, I spent 40 minutes observing the ER. I saw how you spoke to an elderly patient who needed help with her forms. I watched you dismiss her concerns and send her away without assistance. Jessica's face flushed red again. That woman? She was holding up the line. I had 10 other people waiting to be checked in. I told her to do her best with the forms, which is standard procedure when we're busy. You told her you didn't have time for her, Margaret corrected gently. You made her feel like a burden. Because I was busy. Jessica's voice rose defensively. Have you looked around? We're drowning here. 3 nurses trying to manage 30 patients, phones ringing nonstop, doctors screaming for charts, and every single person who walks through that door thinks their problem is the most important thing in the world and that I should drop everything to help them fill out paperwork they could have filled out at home. Patricia, who had been standing quietly to the side, touched Jessica's arm. Jess, maybe you should... No, Patricia. Jessica pulled her arm away. I'm sorry, but this isn't fair. Dr. Chen comes in here unannounced, dressed like a regular person, and starts judging how we do our jobs. She has no idea what it's like down here. None. The younger security guard shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should take this somewhere private. But Jessica was on a roll now, all the exhaustion and stress of what must have been weeks or months pouring out. You want to know why I don't have time to hold every patient's hand through paperwork? Because I've been working 60-hour weeks for the past month. Because we lost 2 nurses and administration hasn't replaced them. Because the computer system crashes 3 times a day, and I have to manually enter everything twice. Because patients yell at me when their wait time is too long, as if I control how many doctors are on duty. Margaret listened without interrupting. This was what she needed to hear, the reality beneath the surface. And yes, Jessica continued, her voice cracking now. Maybe I'm not as nice as I should be sometimes. Maybe I'm short with people. Maybe I should smile more and be more patient and act like everything is fine. But it's not fine. Nothing about this is fine. And coming in here and spying on us and then acting surprised when things aren't perfect? That's not leadership. That's just looking for someone to blame. The silence that followed was deafening. A baby whimpered somewhere in the waiting room. A phone rang at the nurse's station, but nobody moved to answer it. Patricia's face showed a mix of sympathy for Jessica and worry about what would happen next. Margaret took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was measured and calm, but there was steel underneath. You're right about some things, Jessica. You are understaffed. The system you're working with is clearly inadequate, and I can see that you're exhausted and overwhelmed. Jessica's shoulders sagged slightly, like she'd been expecting immediate termination and was surprised to hear anything else. But, Margaret continued, none of that excuses treating patients with anything less than respect. That elderly woman didn't know about your staffing problems. She didn't know you've been working 60-hour weeks. All she knew was that she was scared and confused and needed help. And the person she asked made her feel small and unwelcome. I didn't mean to make her feel that way, Jessica said, but her voice had lost its defensive edge. Now she just sounded tired. Intent matters less than impact, Margaret said. In healthcare, we don't get to have bad days that we take out on vulnerable people. That's the job. That's what we sign up for. Tom took a small step forward. Dr. Chen, if I may, Jessica is one of our hardest working nurses. I've been here 6 years and I've never seen anyone more dedicated. She stays late almost every night. She picks up shifts when others call out. I'm not questioning her dedication, Margaret interrupted, though her tone remained kind. I'm questioning a system that would allow someone this dedicated to burn out to the point where they can't provide compassionate care anymore. Jessica looked up, surprised. You're blaming the system, not me? I'm saying this is bigger than you, Margaret clarified. But you're still responsible for your actions and how you treat people. Both things can be true at the same time. Patricia stepped closer to Jessica, her voice quiet. Jess, why didn't you tell anyone you were working so much overtime? Why didn't you say something to management? Jessica laughed, a bitter sound with no joy in it. And say what? That I can't handle my job? That I'm not tough enough? You know how it works, Patricia. The nurses who complain are the ones who don't get promoted. The ones who suck it up and keep going are the ones who get ahead. That's not how it should work, Margaret said firmly. And if that's the culture here, then that's the first thing that needs to change. She pulled her phone from her bag and checked the time. Almost 11. She looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and saw what she'd missed before. The dark circles weren't just from one bad night. The trembling wasn't just from fear. This was someone who was barely holding it together, who'd been barely holding it together for a long time. Here's what's going to happen, Margaret said, her voice taking on a tone of authority that everyone in the ER could hear. Jessica, I want you to clock out for the day. Jessica's eyes went wide. You're firing me? No, I'm sending you home to rest, paid, non-negotiable, but we're short-staffed. If I leave, there will only be 2 nurses in the ER. That's not enough to... That's not your problem to solve. Margaret cut her off. That's mine. Patricia, can you take over registration for the rest of the day? Patricia nodded immediately. Of course. Tom, I need you to call the nursing supervisor and tell them we need immediate coverage in the ER. Pull from other departments if necessary. And get me the contact information for whoever does staffing schedules. Tom pulled out his radio. Right away, Dr. Chen. Jessica was still standing there, looking lost. I don't understand. I thought you were going to write me up or put me on probation or something. We'll talk more tomorrow, Margaret said. But right now you need rest, real rest. Go home. Sleep. Don't think about this place for the next 24 hours. I can't just leave. You can and you will, Margaret said firmly. Doctor's orders. Jessica looked at Patricia, who gave her a small encouraging nod. Then she looked back at Margaret, confusion and relief and something else warring on her face. "I really am sorry," Jessica said quietly, "about everything. The way I spoke to that woman. The way I spoke to you. I'm not usually like this. I used to love this job." "I know," Margaret said, and she meant it. She'd seen enough burned-out healthcare workers to recognize the signs. Jessica wasn't a bad nurse. She was a good nurse in a bad situation. "Go home, Jessica. We'll figure this out." Jessica nodded slowly, grabbed her purse from under the desk and walked toward the exit. Her steps were slow, uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble or being helped or both. As she reached the automatic doors, she turned back one last time. Margaret was already talking to Patricia and Tom, organizing coverage, making calls, taking charge. Jessica watched for a moment, then pushed through the doors into the rain, and Margaret, standing in the middle of the chaotic ER in her jeans and old sweater, realized that her first day at Riverside Medical Center was going to be a lot longer than she'd planned. Margaret spent the next 2 hours in the ER, and what she saw made her stomach turn. It wasn't dramatic. There was no major crisis, no screaming emergencies, just the slow, grinding breakdown of a system that was supposed to save lives. Patricia handled the registration desk while trying to coordinate with 2 other nurses who were running between patient rooms like their hair was on fire. A doctor stood at a computer terminal, cursing under his breath because the system had frozen again. The elderly woman Jessica had dismissed earlier still sat in the corner, her forms only half completed, nobody having checked on her in over an hour. Margaret walked over to her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you with those forms?" The woman looked up, her eyes watery behind thick glasses. "Oh, I don't want to bother anyone. Everyone seems so busy." "You're not a bother," Margaret said, sitting down beside her. She spent the next 10 minutes helping the woman complete her paperwork, learning that her name was Dorothy, that she lived alone since her husband passed, and that she'd been having chest pains but almost didn't come in because she didn't want to be a nuisance. "You did the right thing coming here," Margaret told her gently. "Chest pain is serious. Don't ever feel bad about seeking medical care." Dorothy smiled, the first real smile Margaret had seen from anyone in the ER all morning. "You're very kind, dear. Are you a nurse?" "Something like that," Margaret said, helping her to the registration desk where Patricia checked her in properly this time. By noon, Margaret had seen enough. She found Patricia in a supply closet, counting medication stock. "Can we talk for a minute?" Patricia looked up, exhaustion written all over her face. "Of course, Dr. Chen. Though I have to warn you, if you're looking for good news, I'm fresh out." They stepped into a small office that was barely more than a closet with a desk. Patricia closed the door and leaned against it. "I know what you're going to say. The ER is a mess. We're understaffed. Our equipment is outdated. The computer system is garbage. And our nurses are burning out faster than we can replace them." "How long has it been like this?" Margaret asked. 6 months, maybe more. It got bad when budget cuts hit last year. We lost 3 experienced nurses and 2 were never replaced. The 3rd position was filled with someone who quit after 2 weeks because she said it was too chaotic. Patricia rubbed her eyes. "Jessica wasn't always like you saw today. When she started here 3 years ago, she was the most cheerful person I'd ever met. Always smiling, always patient. She used to stay late just to chat with patients who seemed lonely." "What changed?" "Everything, nothing. Take your pick." Patricia sat down in the desk chair with a heavy sigh. The workload increased. The support decreased. And somewhere along the way, we all just started surviving instead of thriving. You do what you can. Cut corners where you think it won't hurt anyone and try not to think about how much better things used to be. Margaret pulled out her notebook. "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Patricia talked. She talked about mandatory overtime that nobody wanted but everyone needed, because otherwise the ER would literally have to close. She talked about equipment breaking down and maintenance requests sitting unanswered for months. She talked about the pharmacy being so understocked that nurses sometimes had to call 3 different hospitals to find medications. She talked about the electronic health record system that crashed so often they'd started keeping paper backups of everything, which meant doing every task twice. "And the doctors?" Margaret asked, frustrated, angry. "Some of the best ones have already left for other hospitals. The ones who stay either really love this community or don't have better options." Patricia's voice dropped. "We lost a patient last month. 72-year-old man with a heart attack. He waited in the lobby for 45 minutes before anyone could see him because we were so backed up. By the time we got to him, it was too late. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Was there an incident report? Of course. It went to administration. I don't know what happened after that. Probably buried in a file somewhere. Give me the date. I'll find it. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. You're really going to change things, aren't you? You're not just here to look good and collect a paycheck. I'm here to fix this, Margaret said firmly. But I need honesty from everyone. I need to know what's really happening, not what looks good in reports. The truth is, Dr. Chen, we're all exhausted. We're all doing the best we can with nothing. And we're all wondering how long we can keep this up before something worse happens. Margaret closed her notebook. It ends now. Starting today, things are going to change. Patricia smiled, but it was sad. I've heard that before. Not from me, you haven't. Later that afternoon, Margaret found herself sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital. She'd called Jessica and asked her to meet, half expecting her not to show up. But at 2 o'clock sharp, Jessica walked through the door, looking like she'd barely slept despite being sent home. She slid into the booth across from Margaret, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup for warmth, even though it wasn't particularly cold. I almost didn't come. I'm glad you did. Jessica stared into her coffee. Am I fired? Please just tell me straight. I've been going crazy all day trying to figure out what's going to happen. You're not fired, Margaret said, but we need to have a real conversation. Not as director and nurse. Just 2 people who both care about healthcare. Jessica looked up, surprised. Okay. Tell me about your first day at Riverside. The question caught Jessica off guard. My first day? That was 3 years ago. I know. Tell me anyway. Jessica's face softened as she remembered. I was so nervous. I'd just graduated, passed my boards, and this was my first real nursing job. I remember walking into the ER and thinking it was the most exciting place I'd ever seen. Fast-paced, important work, saving lives. I wanted to be part of that so badly. What was your first patient interaction? An elderly man who'd fallen and broken his hip. He was in so much pain, but he kept apologizing for being trouble. I held his hand while we waited for X-ray and told him about my grandmother, who'd had a similar fall. By the time they took him to surgery, he was calling me his guardian angel. Jessica's eyes were wet now. I went home that night and cried happy tears because I felt like I'd found my purpose. That's the nurse I saw in your file, Margaret said. Excellent performance reviews, patient commendations, leadership potential. That feels like a different person now. It's not. You're still that person. You're just buried under terrible circumstances. Jessica wiped her eyes. This morning when I was yelling at you in the ER, I heard myself talking and I didn't even recognize my own voice. I sounded angry, mean, like all those nurses I swore I'd never become. Jessica, can I tell you something? Margaret leaned forward. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've worked in 12 different hospitals, and I can spot burnout from a mile away. You know why? Because I've been there. 10 years ago, I was you. Jessica looked up, surprised. You? I was running a trauma unit in Chicago. Understaffed, overworked management that didn't listen. I started snapping at patients, coming home and crying, losing sleep over mistakes I thought I'd made. One day I was so exhausted that I nearly gave a patient 10 times their prescribed medication dose. Nearly. I caught it just in time, but that was my wake-up call. What did you do? I took a month off. Real time off, not just a long weekend. I saw a therapist. I admitted that I couldn't keep going the way I was going. And when I came back, I made a promise to myself that I would never let a system break me like that again. Jessica's voice was small, but you can't just take a month off. Bills don't stop, and they'd probably replace me while I was gone. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps broken systems in place, Margaret said. Healthcare workers aren't machines. We're human beings who need rest, support, and reasonable working conditions. And any hospital that doesn't provide those things isn't just hurting their staff. They're hurting every patient who walks through the door. They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop buzzed with afternoon activity around them, normal people on normal days, unaware of the weight of the conversation happening in the corner booth. I don't know how to fix this, Jessica finally said. I'm just one nurse. You're not alone anymore, Margaret said. Starting tomorrow, I'm implementing emergency changes. We're bringing in temporary staff while we hire permanent replacements. We're overhauling the scheduling system, so nobody works more than 45 hours a week unless they explicitly choose to. We're fixing the computer system, even if I have to stand over IT myself. And we're creating real support systems for staff mental health. Jessica's eyes were wide. Can you actually do all that? Watch me. But what about today? What about how I treated you and that elderly woman and everyone else? Margaret's expression grew serious. That's separate. Yes, the system failed you, but you still have responsibility for your actions. So here's what's going to happen. You're taking the rest of this week off, paid, not a punishment, a necessity. When you come back Monday, you're going to attend a communication workshop with me and several other staff members. We're all going to learn better ways to handle stress in difficult situations. And if I mess up again, then we'll deal with it then. But Jessica, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for perfect nurses. I'm looking for real people who genuinely care about patients and are willing to keep trying even when it's hard. From everything I've seen in your file and heard from Patricia, you're that person. You just need support, not punishment. Jessica nodded, tears running down her face now. Thank you. I don't know why you're giving me another chance, but thank you. Because everybody deserves a second chance, Margaret said. And because I believe in fixing problems, not just punishing people. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. When Jessica finally left, she looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Margaret watched her go, then pulled out her phone and started making calls. She had a hospital to save, and only 6 days to make a serious dent before her official start date. The real work was just beginning. 3 months later, Margaret stood in the same spot where Jessica had tried to have her thrown out. But the ER looked different now, sounded different, felt different. 4 nurses worked the registration and triage area instead of 2. The waiting room was still full because emergency rooms were always full, but people weren't waiting 3 hours anymore. The computer system had been replaced with something that actually worked, and the elderly woman who'd struggled with her forms that Monday morning, Dorothy, had sent Margaret a thank you card after her successful treatment, saying the ER staff had been wonderful to her. Margaret watched Patricia training a new nurse, a young woman fresh out of school who looked nervous but excited, the same way Jessica had looked 3 years ago, before the system had nearly broken her. She's going to be good, a voice said beside her. Margaret turned to see Jessica, clipboard in hand, wearing scrubs that looked freshly pressed. But it wasn't the clean scrubs that made her look different. It was her face. The dark circles were gone. Her shoulders weren't slumped, and when she smiled it reached her eyes. You think so? Margaret asked. I know so. I've been shadowing her all week. She actually listens to patients, like really listens. Yesterday she spent 15 minutes with a patient who kept asking the same questions because of dementia. Never got frustrated once, just patiently answered every single time. Jessica paused. I want to be more like that. You are like that, Margaret said. You always were. You just forgot for a while. Jessica shook her head. No, I became something else. Something I didn't like. But I'm working on it. The past 3 months hadn't been easy. Jessica had taken that week off like Margaret ordered, and when she came back, she'd attended the communication workshop. At first, she'd been defensive, arms crossed, clearly expecting to be lectured. But Margaret hadn't lectured. Instead, she'd shared her own story of burnout, her own mistakes, her own journey back to the nurse she wanted to be. The workshop wasn't just for Jessica. It was for everyone, nurses, doctors, administrators. 15 staff members sitting in a circle, talking honestly about stress, compassion fatigue, and the impossible standards they'd been trying to meet. Some people cried. Some got angry. Some just sat quietly and listened. But everyone left understanding they weren't alone. After that, Jessica had asked to switch to a different role. Not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to. She'd moved into patient advocacy, working directly with people who had concerns or complaints about their care. It was the perfect job for her. She knew what it felt like to be overwhelmed and struggling, and she could connect with both patients and staff in ways others couldn't. How's the advocacy work going? Margaret asked. Honestly, it's hard. But it's good hard, you know. Jessica tucked her clipboard under her arm. Last week I helped a family navigate their mother's hospice care. They were so confused and scared, and I just sat with them for 2 hours explaining everything. When they left, the daughter hugged me and said I'd made the worst day of their life a little bit easier. That's beautiful work, Jessica. I thought I'd miss the ER, the emergency rush of everything. But this feels more important somehow. Like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. She glanced at her watch. Speaking of which, I have a meeting with a family in 10 minutes. New patient, lots of questions about treatment options. Go, don't keep them waiting. Jessica started to walk away, then turned back. Dr. Chen? Thank you for not giving up on me when it would have been easier to just let me go. Margaret smiled. That was never an option. After Jessica left, Margaret made her way through the hospital, doing what she did every Monday morning now, walking the floors, talking to staff, observing how things really worked, not from an office, not through reports, but right there in the middle of it all. In the cafeteria, she ran into Tom, the security guard who'd been called to escort her out that first day. He waved her over to his table. Dr. Chen, you got a minute? She sat down with her coffee. Always, what's on your mind? I wanted to thank you for the new security protocols. Having 2 guards on duty in the ER at all times makes a huge difference. We can actually help people instead of just running from crisis to crisis. I should thank you, Margaret said. Your report about safety concerns was incredibly detailed. You clearly care about this place. Tom looked embarrassed. I've worked here 6 years. Never thought anyone would actually read those reports, to be honest. Previous administration always said they'd look into it, but nothing ever changed. Well, things are changing now. Slowly, but they're changing, and they were. The new computer system had reduced paperwork time by 40%. The staffing increase meant nurses could actually take breaks. The updated equipment meant fewer delays in treatment. Patient satisfaction scores were climbing. Staff turnover was dropping. But the biggest change wasn't in the numbers or the equipment. It was in the culture. Margaret had implemented something simple but powerful. Listening sessions. Once a month, any staff member could sign up for a 30-minute meeting with her. No agenda required. No formal complaints needed. Just talking. She'd heard about broken equipment in the pediatric wing that had been broken for 8 months, about a billing process that confused patients and staff equally, about a doctor who was struggling after his divorce and taking it out on nurses, about supply closets that were organized so badly that finding anything took forever. And she'd fixed things. Not everything and not overnight, but she'd fixed enough that people started believing change was possible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Can you come to the ER? Nothing urgent, just something you should see. Margaret headed back down, curious. When she arrived, Patricia was standing near the registration desk with a familiar face. Dorothy, the elderly woman from that first day, was there with a plate of homemade cookies. Dr. Chen, Dorothy's face lit up when she saw her. I was hoping you'd be here. I wanted to bring these for the staff. Everyone was so wonderful when I was here last time. Nothing like that first visit. She lowered her voice. Though I don't like to speak ill of people, that nurse who was at the desk the first time I came in seemed like she was having a very hard day. Margaret and Patricia exchanged a glance. She was, Margaret said gently. But she's doing much better now. Oh, good. Everyone deserves compassion, even the ones who struggle to give it sometimes. Dorothy handed her the cookies. Make sure everyone gets some. Even the grumpy ones. After Dorothy left, Patricia opened the container and offered one to Margaret. They stood there eating cookies in the middle of the ER, surrounded by beeping monitors and rushing staff and all the controlled chaos of a hospital. You know what's funny? Patricia said. That first day when you came in, when Jessica called security on you, I thought it was the worst possible start for a new director. I thought you'd come in with your authority and fire people and make everything harder. And instead you made everything better. Not perfect. We still have bad days. We still get overwhelmed sometimes. But it's different now. People actually want to come to work. They believe things can get better. That's huge. Margaret took another cookie. I didn't do this alone. You, Jessica, Tom, the other nurses, the doctors, everyone did this. But you started it. You could have walked into that ER, pulled rank, fired Jessica on the spot, and made an example out of her. That's what most administrators would have done. And what would that have accomplished? One less burned-out nurse on staff. But all the problems that caused the burnout would still be there. The next nurse would have ended up the same way. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Jessica told me what you said to her? About how you went through the same thing. About being so exhausted you almost made a terrible mistake. It's true, and it changed how I lead. Because I realized that healthcare workers aren't problems to be solved. They're people who need support to do impossible work. A young doctor rushed past, then stopped and backtracked. Dr. Chen, do you have a second? Of course. I just wanted to say the new mental health resources. The counseling program? I started using it last month. It's really helping. I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. After he left, Margaret finished her cookie and looked around the ER one more time. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still problems to solve, still improvements to make. But it was better. Measurably, significantly better. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica. Family meeting went great. They said they've never felt so heard by hospital staff. Just wanted you to know. Margaret smiled and typed back. That's because they were heard by someone who knows how important it is to listen. She pocketed her phone and headed back to her office. There were budget meetings to attend, reports to review, decisions to make. The administrative work never stopped, but now she knew it was worth it. Because somewhere in this hospital, Jessica was helping a scared family understand their options. Patricia was training new nurses to lead with compassion. Tom was making sure everyone felt safe, and Dorothy's cookies were being shared among staff who were tired but not broken, challenged but not defeated. That Monday morning 3 months ago, when a stressed nurse had tried to throw her out, Margaret had seen a hospital in crisis. Today she saw a hospital healing, not because of one person or one decision, but because everyone had decided that compassion mattered, that people mattered. That healthcare was about more than just treating symptoms. It was about treating everyone, patients and staff alike, with the dignity and respect they deserved. And that, Margaret thought as she settled into her office chair, was worth fighting for.